police carried out raids on dozens of properties in response to violent clashes between rival gangs, the Rock Machine and the Rebels.
This is the moment a police marksman took aim from the air, all because police believe the killer who executed him could very well be among the mourners.
On March 15, 2021, Perth residents woke up to a surprise when their neighborhood ex-soldier and war hero was arrested in connection with the public assassination of former Rebels bikie boss Nick Martin. However, this was just the tip of the iceberg. Some said it was a long time coming, and others feared more violence was about to take place. Continue watching as we break down the persistent Rebels Rock Machine Biker Club war that has lasted years and thrown Western Australia into chaos. From car bombings and routine midnight manhunts, we'll get into more details about how these outlaw clubs came to be, why they are at each other's throats, and the current state of the war. If you've been watching this channel for a while, you'll know that this isn't the first time the Rock Machines have been in conflict with the rival biker club. At the beginning of the 2000s, they were involved in what is still considered the largest and bloodiest biker war in history. Going toe-to-toe with the Hells Angels in Canada, they lit the streets of Quebec on fire, bombed buildings, and the two clubs were responsible for the deaths of at least 160 people. But who are the Rock Machines, and how did the Canadian Biker Club end up in Australia? The Rock Machine Outlaw Motorcycle Club was formed in 1986 by legendary Canadian biker Salvatore Cazzetta and his brother Giovanni. At the time, Salvatore had just broken away from the Hells Angels after the gory Lennoxville purge that saw Hells Angels turn against each other, and was an incident that ended with several bodies finding their way to the bottom of the St. Lawrence River. Life as a new club was rather difficult, as they faced competition from other outlaw gangs, most notably the Hells Angels. However, since Salvatore was good friends with the then Hells Angels Quebec chapter president, Maurice Montboucher, the conflict between the clubs didn't escalate. Unfortunately for them, the peace only lasted until Salvatore was thrown into prison. With no leader, Maurice seized the opportunity and attacked the Rock Machine, sparking the decade-long Quebec Biker War. In the end, the Hells Angels won, and with nowhere to go, the Rock Machine was forced to disband and patch over with the Bandidos. Eventually, the Bandidos Motorcycle Club would suffer from internal conflicts and see its own demise just a few years later. And in 2007, the few remaining Bandidos and ex-Mongols dumped their red and yellow jackets, reforming the Rock Machine and adopting black and platinum as their patch colors. Although at the time they were a new club that had just recently found its footing, they would soon go international, eventually becoming the largest current Canadian motorcycle club worldwide, with over 200 chapters across 27 different countries. In Australia's case, it was one phone call from an Australian teenager that changed everything. Rock Machine's Australian roots can be traced to Brent Reker, also known as The Rock, the man who once declared that he was going to become Australia's biggest, baddest bikie. Brent firmly believed that while others loved hanging their artwork on the wall, he preferred his on his body. Evidently, standing at 6'2" and covered from head to toe with tattoos, the man was a total unit, and there weren't many people who could stand in his way. His look was so intimidating that he would cover his tattoos with stage makeup during rental inspections. In a recent Biker News interview, Brent's mother revealed that when he was only 17 years old, he brought the Rock Machine to Australia. He simply called a Canadian chapter and asked if he could start one in Australia. Faced with such burning enthusiasm, they had no choice but to say yes. In 2008, the first Australian Rock Machine church was established. The club grew fast, and by early 2009, another New South Wales chapter was created in the Sydney area. Conflicts between outlaw biker clubs are a common occurrence in the scene, so it wasn't surprising that other already established clubs were taking notice. So far, most confrontations were limited to bar fights and brawls. However, real trouble started knocking when Critical J set up the third Rock Machine chapter in mid-2009 in a Perth suburb. Perth was a rebels' turf, and they weren't particularly inviting to intruders. In fact, the Rock Machine chapter was seen as an act of aggression. The Rebels Outlaw Motorcycle Club is by no means a small fish. In fact, with at least 70 chapters spread out across the country, it is by far the largest biker club in Australia. Not only are they suspected of engaging in various underworld activities, such as drug trafficking, extortion, and tax evasion, but they've also been tied to execution-style killings over the past decades. The Rock Machine was punching well above its weight, but both parties were willing to give the feud a go. According to Australian authorities, the conflict started with online threats and verbal exchanges between the two clubs. Things remained so until a few young rebels switched to the Rock Machine in search of a full patch membership. Eventually, on July 10, 2010, things escalated when a huge brawl broke out at a nightclub. Several people, including the police, were injured. 3 months later, in October 2010, members of the Rock Machine ditched their fists for bombs as the police reported the firebombing of a vehicle of a full patch member of the Rebels Motorcycle Club. Barely a month later, on November 5th, 2010, the two clubs stole the stage at a mixed martial art event hosted at an arena. According to witnesses, a fight erupted between 20 members of the two groups. It was a huge mess, with the Royal Rumble leaving several members injured. Apparently, the rebels took the losing end of the stick. Perhaps fearing that the recent loss might have damaged their reputation, no more than a week later, on November 12th, 15 full-patch members of the Rebels Motorcycle Club were spotted rumbling through Fremantle's entertainment district on a manhunt. They were looking for any Rock Machine who dared to flaunt his colors in public. To their dismay, they didn't find any. 4 days later, the Rock Machines would further enrage the rebels by setting ablaze the Ink Assault, a tattoo parlor owned by the Rebels organization. Firemen were alerted of the arson around 3 AM, and the police later confirmed that indeed a member of the Rock Machines was responsible. That same month saw a series of tit-for-tat events as the two clubs went at it. On top of several beatings on both sides, a vehicle belonging to a rebel was firebombed. Again, another of the rebels' houses were ransacked and vandalized, causing extensive damage. One Rock Machine was even charged with a large cache of high-powered firearms in his car. Found during a traffic stop, in his possession, the police found several rifles, a shotgun, and ammunition. 2011 rolled in, but tempers were still hot. That January, members of the two motorcycle clubs would again meet at the Click nightclub in Fremantle. They again went at it, leaving several people injured. If that wasn't enough, the very next day, a Rock Machine would find a Spearwood tattoo parlor trashed, and his manager assaulted by a group of rebels. All this was going on as the authorities tried to keep up, but they didn't care. The two clubs seemed to enjoy playing cat and mouse, with the police hard on their tails. Every day they were getting bolder, and everyone knew something had to be done before things became fatal. On January 24, 2011, the police would respond by driving an armored vehicle through the front gate of the Rebels Osborne Chapter Clubhouse. Bursting into the scene, the Tactical Response Group officers proceeded to use an angle grinder to cut through a security gate and followed it up by throwing stun grenades into the building. Interestingly, the police would later report to the public that they were unable to find anything in the raid. This was quickly followed up by then Rebels Western Australia President Nick Martin, demanding that the government pay for the damage done to the clubhouse. However, 2 weeks later, it turned out everyone's fears were valid. The Rebels Rock Machine conflict was only a few events away from causing colossal damage and death. On February 25, 2011, the police would seize large amounts of powerful high-grade explosives from a Rock Machine chapter clubhouse. A report released to the public explained that they confiscated enough explosive detonators and an industrial-strength power gel to demolish a large building and cause extreme loss of life. Further investigations led to the Australian police accusing Rock Machine Canada of being involved in providing these weapons of mass destruction. We're talking 54 units of power gel explosives and up to 68 detonators. One could only imagine the amount of destruction these would have caused if the police hadn't intervened. That said, the violence didn't stop. On March 18, 2011, Rebels Western Australia President Nick Martin was the victim of an assassination attempt. He was shot through the elbow in front of his Perth home as he pulled over on his Harley Davidson. He survived the incident, but the police didn't take it lightly. Later, the authorities would launch multiple raids on 9 separate properties belonging to both the Rebels and the Rock Machine. While they confiscated a dozen rifles and over 300 rounds of ammunition, only 2 people were charged as a result of the operation. Now, through all this chaos, it seems that the Rock Machine was actually winning against the much larger and more established Rebels. Several biker gang experts commented that much of their success came from their brazen and sporadic attacks that were hard to pin down. However, it's also worth noting that their numbers had significantly grown through the years. other bikies noticed their success and were quick to change allegiances. Most notably, around June 2012, many young members of the Finks transferred to the Rock Machine, opening a second chapter in Perth, the South Perth chapter. The Rock Machines were so popular that authorities noticed more and more people were Googling how to join the Rock Machine. You see, during its early years, the Australian Rock Machines were unlike other outlaw biker clubs in the country. Yes, they rode their Harley Davidsons for all to see, however, they weren't that big on leather jackets and patches. While they still loved their black and platinum shades, they mostly preferred rings with the eagle insignia on them. Not only was this new in the scene, but it also made them incredibly hard to spot. If anything, you had a better chance of spotting them based on their unique sense of fashion. Also nicknamed the Nike Bikies, Rock Machine members were known for fashion footwear, good personal hygiene, and frequent gym visits. All of this made them popular with the younger crowds of bikers. At this point, you would expect the Rock Machines to take over Western Australia's underworld. After all, their numbers were steadily increasing. Interestingly, that wasn't the case. Not yet anyway. You see, while they took in more bikers, it was more of a quantity than quality type of situation. Not only were more people harder to manage, but most of their recruits were young, uncultured bikies. Discipline was a big problem within their ranks, as most did whatever they wanted. Not only did this lead to internal struggles, but it also made it easier for the police to infiltrate the organization and take it down from the inside. But still, that alone wasn't enough to take them down. That year, something historic happened. In November 2012, Western Australia would pass a bill containing some of the toughest laws against organized crime. Unfortunately for the growing Rock Machines, some laws specifically targeted biker gangs. The idea was to ban bikie gang members from associating or even phoning one another. Even though it would take a few more years for the law to come into full effect, the hefty $12,000 fine put off plenty of young members. Believe it or not, this, coupled with successive police raids, was enough to bring down the Rock Machines temporarily. Forced by circumstances, history repeated itself in 2013, when one of the Rock Machine Perth chapters passed over to the Bandidos Australia. For 2 years, the Rock Machines were down but not out. While there wasn't much suggesting they were still active, the rumors on the streets didn't fade away. And even though the authorities couldn't place a finger on it, the police knew they were still out there. By 2015, the rumors were growing louder, with the Advertiser newspaper reporting that the Rock Machine had commenced operations in the Christie's Beach and Seaford areas. Other biker clubs didn't take it seriously, claiming they were wannabes. The police, however, confirmed that they were monitoring the situation. 3 years later, in April 2018, police confirmed the sighting of the gang's insignia, an eagle's head with the words, "Rock Machine Nomads." Then, as if scripted, just several weeks later, the authorities would announce that the Rock Machines had indeed reopened their Perth clubhouse, and that tensions had resumed with the rebels. By August 2019, deliberate fires and drive-by shootings at members' properties, including homes, gyms, and saloons, were again becoming a common occurrence. On top of that, the police now warned the public about the emergence of the Rock Machines in Adelaide. It turned out that while they had been below the radar for a few years, the gang wasn't idle. While South Australian police labelled the club as an enemy threat, it wasn't until December 12, 2020 that the entire nation realized just what they were dealing with. On that cheerful afternoon, during a drag racing show at the Perth Motorplex, a bullet zoomed across the tracks, grazing the body of a 5-year-old before piercing the chest of former Rebels bikie boss Nick Martin. His body hit the ground before people realized what had just happened. For a few minutes, panicked spectators scrambled away, fearing the shooter would again pull the trigger. This was the second attempt someone tried to take him down, and this time they succeeded. For a thing like this to happen in broad daylight and in such a populated event told the nation all they needed to know. In the words of a then senior police officer, "We have made it our mission to disrupt, disable, and dismantle outlaw biker gangs." Only a few days later, more than 100 officers were assigned to a special police unit created for the sole purpose of investigating the shooting. Nothing was confirmed at the time, but the Rock Machine naturally topped the list among the possible suspects in the assassination. Having previously served as a Western Australia bikie boss, the Rebels Motorcycle Club made it their mission to give Martin as flamboyant a funeral as possible. On December 25th, 2020, curious lookers watched as 200 patched rebels escorted the coffin decorated with $100 bills. Flanked by a dozen police cars and under the watchful eye of a police sniper in a helicopter above, they made their way through the Scarborough Beach Road and onto the burial site. Even Rebels' former national president, Alex Vella, tuned in to share a poem via a video link.
With the rebels, he rode side by side. He was a president and full of pride.
The broadcast came from Malta, where he had been in exile since 2014, when his visa was revoked by the Australian government on grounds of bad character. Nonetheless, despite the show of brotherhood depicted by the rebels, police later found out there had been bad tensions inside the club. In fact, just a few months before the assassination, there had been suspicions that the 51-year-old bikie boss had misappropriated club funds. On top of that, he had recently been stripped of his presidency after being blamed for a major transfer of patched members to the Mongols earlier in 2020. So did the Rock Machine do it, or was it an inside job? Raising more eyebrows, the authorities later established that during his funeral, his house was robbed, with the intruder stealing over $20,000 from his widow. Whether or not it was an inside job, the police knew they had to find answers. They had to rest the public fears that retaliation attacks and friction between the groups could ignite a war. Fortunately, they found who pulled the trigger. No one could have possibly guessed who it was. 3 months after the assassination, the police would report the arrest of an ex-soldier. Even though his name still remains classified, we know he was involved with the Shadows of Hope, an internationally registered charity, mostly made of ex-servicemen like the alleged sniper. Shadows of Hope claims to be the world's most fearless charity, specializing in training rebel factions, managing underworld war zone clinics, carrying out anti-human trafficking raids, and engaging in full combat duty. After his arrest, he was taken to Casuarina prison under police guard, where he remained in the Special Handling Unit, a prison within a prison reserved for Western Australia's highest profile criminals. To date, it remains unclear whether he could have been hired to carry out the murder. The police are still tight-lipped about the details of the case. Nevertheless, the biggest question remains, why did a self-described humanitarian allegedly shoot and kill a bikie boss in front of hundreds of people? Fast forward to 2023, and both clubs are still up and about in Australia. The Rock Machine are now reported to have 11 chapters across the country, as the Rebels still retain their title as Australia's largest outlaw biker club. However, while their conflict remains of much concern, the authorities are more alarmed by what's going on within the Rebels organization. Last year, Gino Vella, the Rebels' godfather and kingpin, passed away, leaving behind a multi-million-dollar empire up for grabs. Some bikie gang experts fear that the staggering assets might be causing rifts within the bikie's royal family. It also doesn't help that one of his sons recently switched from the club, joining the rivals, the Comancheros. Tensions are still high, with the police fearing retaliation might ensue. Nonetheless, as with all things like this, only time will tell what will happen next. Please like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video and want to see more like this in the future. Also comment down below letting us know what you'd like to see next. Thanks for watching and have a good one.